Hey, Typology friends, welcome once again to this amazing podcast where we talk about, the Enneagram and how it relates to our everyday lives. I'm so stoked today. We have our new friend, Elizabeth Husserl, which kind of rhymes with casserole, as I was told. And she is an Enneagram One with a 2-wing and author of the new book, The Power of Enough, Finding Joy in Your Relationship with Money. Elizabeth, welcome to Typology.
Oh my goodness, Ian, I'm so excited to be here.
All right. So before we hit record, you said you've been studying the Enneagram for 20 years. We got to hear something about that.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to age myself. It was longer than that. But I will never forget the moment that I was introduced to the Enneagram. Funny enough, it was in Oaxaca, Mexico. So I had just graduated from my degree in economics, and I was working at a nonprofit in Oaxaca, teaching indigenous women how to do savings and loan cooperatives. And I was taking a workshop. I was like, what am I going to do on my weekend? And I was taking a workshop, and I went to the one yoga studio in town, and they were doing a workshop on the Enneagram. And I had no idea what this was, but I was like, I got time on a Saturday. So I went. And I kid you not, they went through the different types, and I knew immediately I was a 1. I knew that I had a very strong inner critic. I knew my perfectionist side. I just knew, I was like, boom, 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 like the checklist. I mean, I'm a planner. I had a checklist. I was checking off the boxes. And the first thing I did after that Enneagram was walk out the door. I took my watch off and I threw it in the trash. And I said, I'm going to do something radical and try not to live my life from such a rigid place. And so it was really, I found it to be actually super permission giving. And I felt so much lighter just with the knowledge of like, oh yeah, that's been keeping me stuck in this rigid lens of perfection, and there's a way out. So I have such fond memories of when I was first introduced to it, and it has changed my world ever since.
Man, oh man. So just by way of reminder for those of you in the audience who are scratching your head, Enneagram Ones, we call them the improvers because we've been told that that the perfectionist is not an acceptable name for them, and I agree, right? So we call you guys the improvers, and you are a 1 with a 2, and that means that you are, as compared to a 1 with a 9-wing, you're more outward, you're warm, you're more service-driven.
Yeah.
You are focused on helping people improve. Sounds like that's the case, right? In your job where you're working in Oaxaca. You can be assertive, more emotionally expressive. The risks for 1 with 2 are over-responsibility, some people-pleasing. That's that 2 flavor coming in, and a little bit of resentment. But those of you who are ones with 9 wings. A lot of resentment.
Not a little bit, a lot of bit of resentment.
I have a surfeit of resentment. All right. So ones with 9 wings are more inward, right? They're more calm, a little more principle oriented, more withdrawn, more conflict avoidant than you are as a 1 with a 2. And their risks, unlike you, are more like around procrastination, feeling conflicted between the 1 and the 9, and some passivity. So that's just a heads up to people listening, the difference between a 1 with a 2 and a 1 with a 9. Hopefully that's helpful. All right. So you also said,
just before you kick that off, Ian, just because you said it was so dramatic, what is like the biggest gift you feel like that experience gave you that you've carried with you these 20 plus years?
Freedom. Like I didn't know in that moment, Anthony, because I know as a 1, I moved to a 7. And funny enough, I married a 7. So lots of stories to share about that. Was for the first time in my life, I tasted freedom of it doesn't have to be this way. And as I learned about it and learned that actually a 7, walking in the world with more spontaneity was better for me, that was the first time I literally gave myself permission to take off the handcuffs and say, there can be a different way to live. So that, and then I kid you not, diving into the Enneagram is what has probably saved my marriage many times.
Ooh, say more, please.
So I married a 7, right? Which on one hand is my worst nightmare as a 1, and it's what I move towards, right? And so, let me back it up for a second, because I think it's important to say I was raised by a 2 and a 1. My mom is a 2 and my dad's a 1, right? And I can tell stories of how I developed my oneness in my life, right? But then, I met my husband in grad school, and I was so drawn to just how he lived gregariously and so generously. And I was like, oh my gosh, you can't fit him in a box, right? He's amazing and he's magical. And I was just like enthralled by him. And at that point, I didn't know again that he was a 7, nor that I moved towards a 7. And we had like the best honeymoon you can imagine, because I feel like I was dating my better self, right? And so I was feeling so much lighter and more flexible and spontaneous, and life had a different kind of color to it. It didn't feel so strict and rigid and black and white that sometimes my judgment can keep me in. And then after the honeymoon period was over, a 7, right, disintegrates to a 1. So when we would start to fight, on one hand, I wouldn't take his harshness personally, because I'm like, oh yeah, you kind of sound like me right now. You know what I mean? So I was able not to take it personally, but we would get into these tensions and we had to both be right. Right. And he would do things to just like that I thought at the time would be to piss me off. And in the reality, it wasn't he wasn't trying to do that. So I think when we started to dive into the Enneagram tools, and we did it really deep for about 2 years, my therapist, who was also 1 at the time, was guiding us through this. We started to realize that we weren't doing things to piss each other off on purpose. It wasn't personal, but if we could start to really understand our movement, we could be each other's best friends. So he became who I aspired to be when I moved to my 7. I found ways to point out gracefully when he was in his 1. He didn't shut out my 4, right, which he hated, but he started to treat my 4 with a little more compassion. And I wouldn't resist when he was actually taking time to go be in quiet meditation, because he moved to a 5. And so I know I just said a lot of how these numbers come together, but we really understood to not take things personal. And now we actually talk in numbers. Like, just 2 days ago, I was deep in my 4, which is my husband's hardest place to relate to me. But the two of us can be like, okay, you're in your 4. I can express what she's feeling. He can learn how to come towards me, and we can help myself get out of that, instead of him being like, I can't stand you right now. You know what I mean? So we work with these different characters in our family together.
Wow, I love this. I love it because you're also just modeling for us how the Enneagram can be used in real time on a day-to-day basis as a tool for not only self-awareness, but for being skillful in relationships, right?
Yeah. I was going to emphasize it, Ian. It was so helpful. Like, literally, I'm in tears on Sunday. It's Mother's Day, right? So whenever my Mother's Day was, because I was not appreciated in the way I wanted to appreciate, right? So my 2 wing kicks in, takes me to my 4. I'm in my kind of pain cave, right? And my 7 husband hates my 4, right? He's just like so repelled by it. And we had tension in the morning, but at some point he was able to come towards me and say, hey, what's your 4 feeling? And I was able to say, you know what, I'm feeling disappointment, right? And I was able to put words to the disappointment. He helped me stay with the disappointment and actually model to me how, when I was growing up, there wasn't space to name that. That's part of what created this 4 shell, was there wasn't space for that really emotional safety. And so I learned how to be perfect, right? Because I wasn't able to transform those feelings. And he was able to help that 4 integrate back to my core, and then be like, okay, we have the rest of the day. How do we want to go be in our 7 together, right? And so we truly moved through all these numbers in a way that, like, I ended my day just so much more joyful. And that could have gone down the deep end, and we had the skills to get through it together.
So the title of the new book is The Power of Enough. And I'm wondering, I just love the idea that an Enneagram One wrote a book called The Power of Enough.
I know. Isn't that amazing?
It happened again.
Oh, yeah. Man, that's wonderful. Tell me about what is the freight of meaning in that title?
Oh my gosh. I mean, Ian, I wrote that book for myself, right? Is that ultimately I've been, because the one is so judgmental, right? And it goes to the four that feels so much lack. So if this is the world I live in, judgment, lack, I'm like, wait a second, there has to be a way to wholeness. And my way to wholeness is figuring it out, through objective structure and mapping it out and understanding my trade. And so there was something, again, I didn't know it at the time, but when I was in Oaxaca, which is where I was first exposed to the Enneagram, what the indigenous women in those communities taught me is that wealth was not just how much money you had in the bank, right? They taught me that money and wealth are different things. Money is a tool, right? It's a tool and a technology. Wealth is a state of well-being. And for them, wealth was expressed through community connections and dignity and their connections to nature and their rituals and all the things that they were then teaching me, their technology. And so I knew then that my work wasn't back in the wasn't in Oaxaca. My work was back in the States where people had a lot, but still felt poor. And I was in economics, finance, went down my path through a financial planner. And that's what I've been trying to understand is how do we expand our experience of wealth by redefining it outside of just such a direct relationship to scarcity.
So you're talking my language right now. So I was just thinking either this morning or yesterday on my morning walk with the dogs about, kind of where we're at financially, and I was thinking my wife hasn't worked in a good number of years. She is a 9 on the Enneagram. She's not a person who's ever wanted a career. She never had those kinds of ambitions, not drive. She has a much lovelier, I sometimes think I'm married to St. Francis because she's outside planting sunflowers and just loves
no
puttering.
Pressure now.
I mean, just it's wild. It's kind of beautiful. It's so different from me. But then I thought to myself, compensation takes lots of different forms. And so if I were to, yes, would it have been nice to have the income of years of my wife, sort of hauled up in a bank somewhere, for if we ever did retire, which I'm not planning on doing, but if we did or had to for some reason, sure, that'd be nice. But then I'd have to figure out, to me, her compensation, the wealth that I received from her not working was her being in my home every day and the two of us doing life together.
Yes, 100%. I mean, that just speaks so beautifully because one of the concepts that I talk about in the book, Ian, is this idea of wealth being defined more circular as a wealth mandala, right? Mandala is a Sanskrit word for circle, and it's a tool used to move from suffering to joy. Right. So again, my 7 is looking for joy as I'm figuring this out. And what's interesting is that if I take the science of human needs that we know more through the work of Maslow, and we just take the premise that human needs are universal, but the way we satisfy them is unique and personal, and we put them on an equal playing field. Financial stability, which is what you were talking about, is one slice of the pie, one of 12. But connection, belonging, purpose, leisure, all these things that I'm hearing you describe, your wife brings to the table and amplifies because she's putting the resources of time and attention towards, that gives you a more diversified wealth portfolio than just saying, hey, I don't know if you call her babe, hey babe, get back to work, right? Let's build the financial stability slice of the pie, which is 1 out of 12, and just add more money to it for the sake of adding more money. You could grow this slice of the pie, but it's going to come at the expense and potential lack of these other areas. Ooh. So when I talk about diversification, right, because we talk a lot about that as a financial planner, yes, I have diversification in investment strategies and asset classes. You also need diversification in your strategies to meet all the aspects of wealth.
Okay, hold on a second. Anthony, I'm getting chilly bumps here. Okay, well, because here's the thing, Elizabeth. So let's talk about narratives, right? I grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut. Okay, that was a problem to start, right? Greenwich, Connecticut, wildly wealthy. I grew up with the wealthiest of the wealthiest kids ever, right? Dads were Wall Street magnates. They were, corporate lawyers, ambassadors, you name it, right? And so messages around money were crazy where I grew up. And then I went to Bowdoin College, and everybody there went to Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, all these places. But I was an artist. And I was like not at all drawn to that world of private equity. There wasn't much of that then, but, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And so I always felt a little weird about money. And then I became a therapist, and then I became an Episcopal priest. And then I did all these different things, which were not exactly big money makers. Right. And it wasn't until later in life with books that I had some more financial success, and that was wonderful. But I've carried this message, this narrative inside for so long that because there's always, as a 4, compare and despair. Here it comes, comparing myself to peers, right, who grew up and killed it, But to your point, a lot of them did it. Like I'm thinking about a friend of mine that went to work for an investment bank, and I think she ended up sacrificing too much other stuff on the pie to get ahead. I mean, like her whole pie. I mean, her whole pie was work and then a tiny slice for going to the bathroom. That was about it, right?
No water, no food?
No, not really. Not really. So anyway, I love this conversation.
She had one of those camel packs. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Or like an IV but I think that's really important, Ian, because it's people don't realize that people can be super conscious around investment fees and advisory fees, but there are negative returns to your investment on time, right? If you're like stuffing full of this one slice of the pie to the extent that's going to burst at the seams, because you're just adding money for more money because you think that is your metrics of success at the expense of all of these other areas, you are living in poverty, right? And that's an edgy thing to say. But the reality is that the more I've been kind of sharing this idea with people go like, I'm not crazy, right? And there could be a different way for us to envision what economics looks like, what wealth looks like. How do we talk about it? How do we define about it, right? And you would appreciate this, Ian, as a 4 therapist, is that one of the exercises that I bring in the book is literally sitting down and having a conversation with money, a Gestalt chair exercise, sitting down, having this conversation with money. And to some extent, it's like getting rid of the interference, right? And saying, hey, who are you and me together, money? What is our relationship about? I mean, think about it. We do this with relationships, right? We want to have our own unique marriage, even though we have all this outside external opinions of what it looks like. Ultimately, you and your partner need to figure it out. And so I tell all my clients, no one, not me, not an investment portfolio manager, not a CPA, no one should stand between you and your relationship to money. It's got to be a direct relationship. You can employ experts and outside guidance to help, but you have to have a direct relationship to money. And so as you were talking, Ian, I'm like, oh my gosh, you could literally sit down and have a conversation with money and be like, money, let's figure this out. Let's be the best model for 4s when it comes to the relationship to money. Amazing. We haven't done that yet. You know what I mean? And it's different than what a 3 is going to do in a relationship to money. It's different than a 1's going to do, right? But let's be that. And let's get super excited about what does it look like when the artist gets a lot of you.
Ooh. All right. So Anthony will agree. I know, because we've spoken about this stuff. Let me just tell you, in my life, what has been the greatest source of wealth? What has given me more compensation than anything else? All right. It would be the moment in a client or a group's eyes when I see the light go on, the light of insight, the light of like where you know that you have so deeply emotionally connected with them, and that neither of you are alone anymore, and that they've had some kind of spiritual awakening in that moment that will have moved the needle in their life permanently. And I always tell people, like, you can't pay me for that. Like, that's just too great. Like, money is incidental at that point, right? Anthony's a songwriter. I was a songwriter. And when you see a song land on somebody and you just see the tears well up, or the joy, and you're like, for this I was made, and this is my remuneration, is this moment. So you're restoring finances for me in a way that it's really helpful.
Yeah. And I think what I would say to both of those examples is that the growing edge for us as humanity is to learn how to experience wealth and not just accumulate it. Because what you both describe is the experience of wealth, when you're actually viscerally satiated, satisfied, and fulfilled. Right. And that is very different, because the reality is there's so much scarcity in finance and economics, and our scarcity brain is real. Right. There's science has proved that we are wired to seek. Yeah. That's what kept us alive. So how do you work with the scarcity brain is you call in a different center, which is your body, and you help your body learn how to feel satiated and fulfilled. Right? That moment of insight where you're like, you saw your client come alive, or the moment that the notes are just perfect, and time stops, right? It's that flow state. Mm-hmm. If you literally swallow, consume that insight, let all of the cells in your body just experience satiation, your body starts to experience wealth as well-being that allows your scarcity brain to chill out.
What? That's so good. Oh my gosh. Wow. What a practice.
So my 7 is so excited, because my 7 is like, that's how I work with the 1, right?
Wow. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Now, is that tied into these 2 cycles of wealth you talk about? Like there's this abundance, scarcity, and then meaning and fulfillment.
100%. Because what happens is that we get stuck in the abundance scarcity. We're like, I'm going to push scarcity away by grabbing onto abundance. But what happens is that we kind of lose sight. We're like, more money, more success, more clients is going to solve this sense of scarcity. Right. But notice my body, I'm pushing it away and grabbing onto it. I'm not really relaxed. Right. I'm still kind of tense in the situation. Right? Because it doesn't solve the brain. And again, I have a super strong brain. I'm a 1, I'm a planner, I'm organized, right? And so I've had to learn this the hard way, to be like, that's not chilling me out. It doesn't matter if I make more money, if I invest more in my SIP IRA, like I'm still not feeling any different. So the meaning fulfillment cycle is something that has to be brought in equal relationship to the abundance scarcity, to be like, okay, if I'm not translating what I'm grabbing on more of into actual meaning and fulfillment, and putting my hands down and letting my body viscerally understand that I'm creating strategies that bring meaning and satisfaction, fulfillment, I'm not solving for a state of wealth that's connected to well-being. So that's why bringing meaning and fulfillment and using that as a filter to make decisions in our financial world and decisions in our wealth world helps us become better at the strategies. Because if you remember what I said before, needs are universal, but the way we satisfy our needs are unique and personal. So we do get to design the strategies we use to solve the needs of the wealth mandala. Some are going to be better than others, depending on the level of satisfaction. Some will be monetary and some won't. And I think it's really important that, again, you have a diversity of needs in your portfolio.
Okay. I'm doing really well right now, Anthony. Yeah. I'm just feeling like, well, first of all, I feel less shame around money right now. Because as an artist, as a therapist, as a priest, I was always like, man, I just didn't worry about money until now I'm worried about money. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, it just never occurred to me. That part of the pie was too small. I was just out there accumulating a different kind of wealth for a long time. And now I'm having to pay more attention to the actual monetary wealth side of life. So this is really, really sweet to hear this stuff. So you talked too about needs, satisfiers, and wants.
Yeah.
Unpack that.
Yeah. So in relationship to needs, right? Again, I mentioned it earlier, but Maslow is who's kind of made the conversation of needs more part of our kind of popular culture. I studied with another economist from Chile, Manfred Maxneef, who took Maslow's works on needs, and he introduced this idea of satisfiers, that we can be different in the way that we satisfy. And I full transparency, he was an economist from Chile who was trying to create kind of more Latin American economic policy to individuate from the United States, right? He's like, wait a second, can't we decide what economic policy works best for our country, right? So there is that kind of like parental individuation perspective there. But I think it's really important because if we get so the way you satisfy is literally what's the strategy you're going to use. So if some of the needs are connection and belonging and purpose and leisure, so let's use leisure, right? Sometimes people say, I'm going to satisfy my need for leisure by taking a vacation, and they plan this super expensive vacation. They're like, ooh, that was an awesome vacation, but now my credit card bill is really high. I got to go work harder to pay that off. So you can see how one satisfier, my one strategy might satisfy a need, but then create a negative response somewhere else, right? So let me back it up. If a client comes to me and say, I'm feeling burnt out, I need more leisure, that slice of the pie, to your point about the friend who was just working all the time, is very low. I'll say, okay, how do we plan for unstructured time, right? Time when you're off, because I think that's actually what people are more craving. And that means no scrolling Instagram, right? No, where you can just wander, where you can lay in a hammock and do nothing. And it's free. And so how do I add strategies that help one slice of your pie without taking away from others? Those are synergistic satisfiers, right? Where potentially you're adding to several pieces at once. And so the more skilled we become at designing what our wealth strategies are, the more we're building the portfolio in a way that's synergistic, right? And it's adding to different areas. And I'm living wealth as a state of well-being, not just as a portfolio that I'm adding more dollars and cents to, because we know that feels abstract. You're like, great, my count is up, right? Recently, at the start of the year, accounts were down. We feel a lot of anxiety, but it's abstract. So if we start to build our relationship to wealth in a way that's embodied, somatic, that we can experience, then it starts to make more sense in all parts of ourselves.
Ooh, love that. You said, or you may have hit this earlier, but in your East-West studies, like, what is one Eastern mindset about money that could really help us in the West?
I love the Buddhist approach to hungry ghosts, right? This idea that you can that sense that you can just continue to consume and never be satisfied, right? And I think that's a really good metaphor for us, that we actually live in a hungry ghost environment where we're unconscious consumers. And I think what's really important, Anthony, consumption's not bad, right? It's a neutral act. We consume water and food to nourish our bodies. But what we consume and the quality of consumption does help us be like, okay, am I absorbing it and lining my stomach and starting to feel full? Or am I not paying attention? It has no impact on me. It's still going out the other way, and I'm stuck in the hungry ghost.
We talk a lot about the hungry ghost. I've often suggested Gabor Mate's book, in the realm of hungry ghosts, and this great kind of Jungian archetype, which I normally assign to sevens when I'm trying to explain gluttony. Because for them, it's like they're feeding on adventures, experiences, stimulating ideas, constant kind of consumption of like that Epicurean kind of like obsession with, having more. But I love it as you apply it in this context.
Well, and I think what's really important, bringing it back to the Enneagram, Ian, is that what's enough for me as a 1 is not the same as my husband who's a 7, right? He's a glutton, right? And so my sense of enoughness is when I'm connected to joy, which is my integrated self in my 7-ish quality. His sense of enoughness is when he's connected to kind of his meditative thinking state, which is his 5. So I think it's really important that I think the Enneagram could really shed light on what are those qualities that actually could give you a sense of enough, and how then to prioritize that, right, in your life. I can get in total workaholic mode as a 1 and be super strict and rigid around my work. And I've had to create boundaries, and I've had to make sure I have structured time, again, structured time for joy, right, which connects me to my sense of enough. So I think that's a really important way to think about it.
So I had a friend ask me a question years ago that has stuck with me. I don't know if I've entirely answered it, but I'm going to pose it to you. In a moment when I don't even remember what we were talking about, but he just looked at me and he said, "What is money for? What's the purpose of money? What's it for?" And I'd never had someone ask me the question, what is money for? What do you think?
Oh, There's so many wonderful ways to answer that, Ian. I think money is a tool and a technology, right? It allows it, so we use it to communicate, right? So we use it as a tool and technology to communicate. How do we exchange things with each other? We use it to communicate trust, right? Like if I'm in my small, close-knit community, money becomes more of a tool that we use to exchange things, right? Less barter, but more like, okay, I want this, you want this, we're going to use currency. So it's not even money, currency. It could be beads, it could be stones, it could be whatever, right? As our community has expanded, and I don't know you so well, I just met you, Ian, right? And so if you're like, okay, Elizabeth, I'm going to hire you for your financial planning services, and I don't know you, how do I trust you? Is you pay me money. I'm like, okay, I know money. I trust that if you're going to deposit money to my bank account, then that's going to be valuable. So then I will give you my service. So notice that money, it's a tool for exchange, but it also has been a technology for trust, which is also what makes it so confusing. Because then we're like, wait, if I don't have a lot of money, then I'm not trustworthy, right? Like our trustworthiness has been replaced by creditworthiness. So it can get really confusing if we don't have those intimate relationships to lean into. And the last thing of what I would say money is for, money is a mirror in this material world, right? Our relationship to money helps us see the ways that we are showing up or we're not showing up in this material world. So it's a brutally honest mirror.
Years ago, I had a friend of mine. He was a very, how do I describe him? He was an older guy. All of his life, he'd been the pastor of a little church. And he hardly made any money his whole life. And he retired. And the church was small, but actually had some very wealthy people in it. And they realized at the end of his career that, they hadn't really set him up at all, to retire, and he had never asked. So they put a little nest egg aside for him. It wasn't huge. Maybe it was $100,000 or something like that. He retired, and then he died shortly after, and his wife knew nothing about finances. So these guys, the elders of the church, got together, and they looked at his checkbook, and they burst into tears. And they realized that he had basically all of his life, they looked at all of his records for like 30, 40 years, had given away like 50 or 60% of his income every year. He just gave the money away to the poor, to projects, to, really, to feed the homeless. I mean, that like 50 or 60% of a not very big salary was going out the door every year. And I always was so moved by that. And I've never, that story's 40 years old, and I've never forgotten that model. To him, he was richer than hell.
Yeah. Well, he had enough, right? His needs were probably being taken care of by his job. He had a place to live. It sounds like hopefully he had a good relationship. He's like, if you don't need it, why hoard it, right? A lot of times we hoard it because we're thinking our scarcity brain is, I'm preparing for this future, AKA called retirement. And I do think, again, I'm a financial planner. That's a lot of what I do with clients is help them plan for future goal, present goals, and deal with past stuff, right? Debt. But I tell all my clients, you can't let yourself just be dictated by the future at the expense of the present moment, right? Because we also don't know, well, am I going to be around for that? And so it sounds like he knew what enough was. And maybe because he loved what he did was like probably not going to retire if he was able-bodied, right? A lot of times, we retire when we can't work anymore if you're doing what you love. And so why hold on to it? Why not gift and see the impact of that while you're alive?
Wow. Everybody, we're talking with Elizabeth Husserl, which rhymes with casserole. She is,
I'm not going to live that down.
No, never. She is an investment advisor, co-founder of Peak 360, and also now, of course, the author of this wonderful new book, The Power of Enough, Finding Joy in Your Relationship with Money. And I want to encourage all of you to go out and get this book, man. Like, it is just chock full of wisdom around a subject that, understandably causes a great deal of confusion and anxiety and that for all of us in one shape or form.
I have a sort of an interesting question, like for myself. I'm not sure how to phrase it, but like, if you could like listen in on like a family's like financial DNA, like how would you know when there's a cycle that needs breaking?
That is such a great question, Anthony, and that one hasn't been asked yet in my podcast tour. So I would think so. So how to listen for a cycle that needs to be broken? I think it's first really important to say we all have financial DNA, right? So I think you're naming something that's in the room because we come through a lineage that has marked us, right? And I think it's really worth taking the time to know what your financial DNA is. What are the things that have worked in pushing the legacy forward, your lineage forward, and what are those things that are holding you back? And I would say if I'm listening to a family talk, I'm listening for areas of tension, right? That's what starts to show me, okay, there's something that's unresolved and undigested, right? Or I'm listening for ways where perhaps, again, I'm trained to look at the wealth mandala and listen for scarcity in these different areas, right? And so that's what I'm listening for. And I think what's really kind of freeing in the framework that I use that now and anyone can use through the book is when you start to listen to gripes or complaints, if you can place them in a relationship to the different need, you can actually get to the root of what's happening, which allows you then to kind of solve it. So for example, right, I knew there was a deep scarcity in my family lineage, in my financial DNA. My grandfather was an Austrian Jew who left Austria during the start of the Second World War. This is not a story that's common to me. It's actually, it's pretty widespread. So my grandfather ended up in Colombia, South America, with no Spanish and $50 in his pocket, and was never able to shake that sense of scarcity. Right? He died with holes in his socks and a lumpy mattress because he was always saving for World War III. My dad inherited that scarcity, even though I was raised by two working parents, right? And so as a kid, it was confusing because I'm like, wait a second, I'm seeing you work, you pay for my school, we can travel to go see my family in Colombia. Why does it feel scarce, right? And there was no little software update button that we have on our phones to be like, what's the new system? And part of what I needed to do is to be like, where is that scarcity? Which need is it connected to? And in reality, it was connected to the need of belonging. My grandfather never figured out how to belong in South America. He pushed my parents to move to the United States for more opportunity. My mother never figured out how to belong in Louisiana. So the pain in my family has been around belonging. That is where I have felt deep lack and poverty. That is what I needed to heal to not pass on to my daughter.
Wow. All right. So this is where this talks to me. My father was a very successful film and television executive, right? So he worked for Columbia Screen Gems Motion Pictures in Europe and particularly in the UK and the Middle East. And but our journey, he was also a chronic alcoholic, and so our journey was crazy wealth, holes in our socks, newspapers in our loafers, crazy wealth, shoes, newspapers in the, and my parents
feast
also
and famine.
Feast and famine all the time. And now this is also where it gets interesting. When we start talking about the Enneagram and instincts, like around subtypes, and instincts, right? I'm a self-preservation type, which is for obvious reasons.
Makes sense.
As a self-preservation type, things like around personal needs and care and having an environment that supports well-being and also having safety is really important. So there's another driver, right? Which is what's our dominant instinct that also then goes on to determine our subtype. But what is that dominant instinct? Because if it's self-preservation, you're going to have issues probably around scarcity and anxiety. And I think that's helpful too.
Yeah. Well, and it's really interesting because with the self-preservation, right, you can have issues around scarcity, but then how do you solve for it? Do you push money away, like you're saying before. I'm like, I'm just going to be the best artist I can be. And then later in life, I have to bring the material reality back in, versus I'm like the health. I mean, you tell me, I'm not a self-preservation, I'm a sexual one, right? But as a self-preservation, what would be the healthier expression of that might actually be bringing money in to the conversation of like, what's our strategy to take care of our needs without having to give up who I am? I'm just making that up because I'm not a self-preservation for, but I think it is important to know what do we do in reaction to those instincts? And then how do we actually bring money in to have a different conversation?
And what's so funny is my wife is a sexual 9. So she's 1-to-1 dominant.
Yeah.
And she's self-pres repressed.
Oh.
And so we would have little arguments. Because I would be the one because I'm the one who's going, we're running out of money. And she'd be like, hey, let's sit on the couch and eat pizza and like hug, and I'd be like, no. So her dominant instinct is obviously driving my dominant instinct crazy, because mine is judging hers as wrong, because, and she'd look at me like, what are you so worried about? Like, and so this is really helpful. We should have a whole episode, Anthony, about instincts and how they have such powerful drives in the human heart and mind. Yeah. Well, Elizabeth, this has been so amazing. Thank you so much. Everybody, check out The Power of Enough, Finding Joy in Your Relationship with Money, written by a 1 with a 2. So the writing will be extraordinary. And you will find the organization unparalleled anywhere in all of literature.
I have to say, I appreciate you saying that. It is a very well-structured book guiding you to joy. I mean, talk about the 1-7 marriage. So
I love it. I love it. Hey, where do people learn more about you, Elizabeth?
So you can go to my website, Elizabeth Husserl, that's HUSSERL.com. You actually get a ton of free resources. The Wealth Mandala is there, so they can go there. And they can follow me on Instagram, which is at Elizabeth Husserl. I have lots of fun posts there often, so either.
Awesome. Anthony, as always, love being with you, pal.
Same, and I'm going to go get your book, Elizabeth, so looking forward to it.
Yay, very exciting. It's been such a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, indeed. And listen, everybody, you know how this goes. May you have love. May you have joy. May you have peace. May you have healing. And may you have rest. Until next time, everybody.
This is your before and after story. Instead of imagining a rewarding career in medical imaging, Southeastern College can actually take you there. Prepare for a career in ultrasound, radiology, and X-ray technology. With hands-on specialized training, simulations, and real-life experience with the latest imaging technology, you'll be ready to play a vital role on any healthcare team. Transform your life by helping others. Southeastern College. Your future is bright. Visit scc.edu to get started.